So Shardbound recently released last week in open beta, and if that name sounds familiar to you, it's probably because the game did exist a long while back, but it died, the servers closed down, and now it has been revived by new developers, and like a $5 million budget or something crazy like that, so it's got a lot of backing behind it currently. If you don't know anything about Shardbound, it is a card board game, very similar to a lot of games that we play on the channel. So it mixes a lot of different elements of both the card game side of things and this kind of chessboard things. And there's a lot of things going on here, actually. There's a lot of things that I want to dive into, but you can currently check it out for yourself on the Epic Games Store. It's not currently offered on Steam or anywhere else at the moment. I imagine it will be in the future, but for now in this open beta, limited access, that's all that is going to be available to us. The game itself is planned to be integrated with Web3. I don't know all of the details there. There's probably going to be some like tying wallets to your card earnings and stuff like this. I'm not really sure about all of that, but what I'm interested in is the gameplay, because I was thoroughly impressed when I got into the game. I had a little bit of my reservations because I played the old Shardbound. It didn't take off right. And this game, though, I think they've included a lot of mechanics that pair really nicely together. We'll get into all of this stuff. So I want to start with the mana system, because it's actually using like two different mana systems combined together. So half of the mana system is using like the Hearthstone mana system, meaning you gain 1 mana on turn 1, 2 on turn 2, 3 on turn 3, and slowly building up. It refreshes each turn, but you can only build up to 5 mana or crystals in this game. There is an additional 5 slots for light blue crystals. Your main mana is the dark blue crystals, and the light blue crystals are actually cumulative mana that you can stockpile, similar to Faria's mana system. And how you gain these is kind of similar to Legends of Runeterra's system. In Shardbound, how this works is every turn you can store at least up to 1 unspent dark blue crystal. That gets converted into a light blue, and there are other ways to gain light blue crystals on the board as well, using these blue crystal pillars that come up from the ground. You can combat hit these and gain extra light blue crystals, which again, the light blue crystals is like Faria's system, so it's cumulative, they don't disappear between turns, you can stockpile this up, which leads to some very interesting coordination with your mana system here. Like you can invoke strategies from the Hearthstone mana system, but also strategies from Faria's mana system. I think a lot of this merges together really interestingly. The curve of mana does feel a little bit wonky because of this. I mean, you can often play a 4-drop on turn 2 because of how the crystal things spawn, but the maximum cost that a card can be is pretty interesting. It seems like the biggest costing card is often 6, but obviously you can go up to 10. There are 10 slots on your mana bar if you end up building up 1 each turn or getting a few extra from the mana crystals. But if 6 is your typical maximum, I mean, and I'm able to play a 4-drop on turn 1, yeah, it is a little bit wonky feeling, but it is pretty interesting, what I've seen so far at least. And apart from the mana crystals that pop up from the ground, there's also these orange ones that pop up from the ground, which are kind of victory point crystals. I don't know the proper terminology, but these ones give you an alternate win condition. So if you combat hit the victory crystals, you will have those crystals kind of hover around your creature, whichever creature combat hit into it, and if they survive for a turn, you get to store those as victory points, and if you get 8 victory points, then you win the game. Now, I was a little concerned about this one at first. Having 2 win conditions is a little bit strange. It can feel awkward. I mean, why not just have the 1 win condition? But as I played more, I realized the purpose to this. There is a lot of different mechanics that really help play into this and make the victory point condition pretty exciting and keeps the game pacing moving along. So one concept that this kind of helps is your hero obviously doesn't die very easily. So if your hero actually hits these victory crystals, pretty unlikely that they're going to die. So you are more incentivized to send your hero out to these crystals. And mana crystals and victory crystals both, they will spawn in random locations on the board, which randomness always a no-no word in competitive play, but I think so far it's working pretty well in this game. It means that you have to have your hero be very proactive. He has to be kind of central in the board so that wherever the spawn locations pop up, you're ready to snap those victory crystals with your hero. But there are disadvantages, right? If you combat hit into a crystal, whether it's a victory crystal or a mana crystal, you're giving up your combat hit for the turn and not using that to control the board. So I think there's really interesting implications with both of these orange and blue crystals, and it's a little bit different from Faria, where creatures can just automatically harvest Faria and then combat hit things. You have to decide, do you want to gain extra mana, do you want to gain extra victory points, or do you want to take those good clears on your turn? And unlike a game like Faria, your creatures are pretty close together. This is especially relevant in the summoning locations, which we can touch on right now. So every creature in the game has haste. Now, haste, I assume most people know what this is, but it's basically just you don't have summoning sickness. In other words, the moment you play a creature, you can move and attack with it. And I've spoken about this in the past with games. I don't really like the haste keyword being thrown on every single creature. It makes it for very not super fun gameplay competitively, because suddenly your creatures can come down anywhere on the board. Kind of eliminates the strategical positioning of the game, and it makes your creatures feel a little bit more like spells rather than creatures. Having said that, in Shardbound, they actually do a pretty good job of this. So your summoning locations are limited to one side of the board. So you can't actually haste anywhere on the board unless you have the flying keyword, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But this allows you to actually retreat your creatures away from the enemy zone if you want to preserve them and not get haste attacked. But if you are too passive, then you're going to give up these crystals that spawn on the board. And so you have to play this game of pushing towards your opponent's side so that you can contest these crystals, these board objectives, but you have to also be careful not to get killed by your opponent's creatures that can haste down. So you might want to be a little bit passive on turns, you might want to be a little bit more aggressive. It's a very back and forth, and there's a lot of things to manage in your matches. And because of how the terrain is structured, there's a lot of these boulders and like blockages and choke points. You can kind of play around haste a lot better in this game, where you can body block maybe your more vulnerable creatures, which I think is another really cool solution. And another way they kind of sort of limit the power of haste creatures is in Shardbound you do have a unit cap. So you can only have 3 creatures on the board unless they have a certain keyword or you have a certain ability or something. But this unit cap does make spells stand out as a unique and different cards. Like, there's no cap on how many spells you can include in your deck. So I think that that does help cushion the impact of haste to a certain degree. You do have the option to exile any number of your creatures, so just remove them from the game to make room to play more creatures. So it's not like you're stuck with this unit cap once you max out. And this pairs really nicely with the haste mechanic too, because it gives you a purpose to sacrificing one of your creatures for a tempo play, like taking a really good trade or position on the board at the price of losing a creature. It does lead to some very explosive turns. If a player is close to winning, they can just attack with all their creatures, sack their board, and play another swarm of haste creatures to attack with. But this is probably only viable near the end game when players have built up all their mana, so ending games quickly near the end isn't necessarily a terrible thing. I'll have to see how this plays out in competitive play though. There may be some pretty cheesy strategies because of this mechanic. Just hitting with all your guys, sacking the board, hitting with another swarm of creatures. That sounds really, really explosive. But I am super curious to see this in an actual like competitive setting when people have figured out the meta. Is going to be very interesting and exciting because a lot of these mechanics are actually super cool. Like they mesh really well together. It's very obvious to me that the developers spent a lot of time on-game mechanics. They're not just trying to cash grab this game, at least I don't believe. Like, it seems like some actual heart was put into the mechanics here. As you may have noticed, the board kind of changes match to match. Like, there's different maps you can play on, and there's also some terrain features and different height levels to it. So this was a thing in the old Shardbound, which they've also kept in this newer version, where these sort of slightly elevated locations exist. You don't inherently gain bonuses from these height advantages, but some of the creatures have keywords that do things at different height levels. And one of those is ranged creatures. So how ranged creatures work in this game is you need to have a line of sight on the target you're trying to hit. But it's not like maybe Faria's system where you just shoot in a straight line. Line of sight means if you can draw a line with your mouse kind of, and it's not being blocked by any terrain features or blocked by enemy units, then you can shoot the thing. It's a little bit ambiguous. I don't know how I like this, but I guess it's okay. I don't really have too many things to say about that. Obviously, standing on a higher elevation is going to give you more shooting opportunities, and there's some keywords like my archer guy who can retaliate attacks as long as he's standing on a higher elevation. So no creatures can actually retaliate unless they have certain keywords like this. And then boulders are a big mechanic in the game. This was also, I remember, in the old version. There's a lot of cards that play around with boulders. Like, I can summon these boulder creatures out of the boulders, so they can pretty much spawn anywhere on the board, at least where there is a boulder. Boulders are destructible by certain cards. You can't attack them, but certain cards will blow them up. Which might open up additional shooting lines or additional strategic locations to plant your creatures in, which is kind of cool. But yeah, the boulder creatures have a very large threat range, similar to flying creatures. A flying creature has no movement limit, so normal creatures have can only move 3 spaces away, and they can attack as well. Some creatures are limited to just 2 movement, and then flying creatures can move anywhere on the board. So they are a true haste. You can't protect against flying creatures. If your opponent has a flying creature in the deck, you can't really play around it, which I think might be problematic. I didn't really experience too much of flyers, but on paper it sounds very oppressive. I imagine a lot of the flyers have pretty limited stat lines, but definitely something that's a bit concerning, at least on paper for now. I think that all of this is not too terrible in a game where everything already technically has haste. It just keeps the game moving and makes the pacing snappy and exciting every single turn. And then a lot of the game mechanics add to the snappiness and trying to move the game along at an efficient pace, like those crystals and things really force you to not stay back and be passive. You have to be moving your creatures out into your opponent's side. You got to be moving them towards the center, different locations. Positioning and kind of picking which side you go on is super important. Like it is in Faria. Like, I know I keep bringing up Faria. Maybe not everyone knows what this game is, but in Faria, you've got like 2 different sides often that you go down, and investing your creatures in one side or the other is it's a pretty important decision to make. If you invest too hard in one side, your opponent might be able to push a little bit more down the opposite side. And I think a similar thing is true in Shardbound. You got to be very careful on which location, which area of the board you actually invest your creatures into. It's a big deal if you make a mistake there. Now, for the card earning model, this part scares me a little bit. Now, I don't know a ton about it yet. I think that the game is pretty early on in its development. I don't know if this is going to be what the card earning model is in its final form, but there's some things that scare me, and I'll touch on all of these things. So one is the upgrading card system. You'll notice that each card has these 3 stars on them, and any extra copies of cards that you gain from booster packs or whatever, you can destroy those to upgrade your cards, and this will give them additional stats. And each upgrade gives half a star, so you have 6 upgrades in total, I imagine. Maybe those get more granular as you go along, but to my knowledge, you have to upgrade them 6 times, and the stat lines get pretty crazy. There is some randomness, I believe. Like, some creatures, if you upgrade, they deal, it says 2 to 3 damage, so Sounds like it's a little bit random. Not a big fan of randomness, but whatever. It's small numbers, not a huge deal, I guess. The bigger deal, though, is the variance in the stat lines. Like, if you're playing against an opponent who has the exact same deck, except it's upgraded, especially if it's upgraded 6 times, like, you just have no hope of winning. So it feels like that could be pay to win in a little ways, but again, I don't really know how generous the card earning system is going to be. Maybe it's going to be pretty easy, like if you want to play one deck, you can just throw all of your upgrades into that singular deck. Maybe it's not a big deal. I don't know yet, it's just a little bit of a red flag to me. I'm going to have to play a little bit more to get a better idea for this. The Web3 integration could potentially be another red flag. I'm not sure. I know that there's been a lot of card games recently that have been adapting the Web3 things with like crypto integrations and stuff. And what that often means to me is that there's a lot of incentive on money, especially for the players playing the game as well. Like, a lot of the game seems to just be money driven, and that's not really what I want in my card game. However, as I mentioned, it seems like there's been a lot of heart and soul put into the actual game mechanics, and that is a green flag to me. So I think this game honestly hinges on the card earning model. I think so far what I've seen, the gameplay itself is actually very cool. I'm super excited to see this game develop. I'm super excited to see the competitive scene. I'm excited to be involved myself in the competitive scene, because all around I just really like the game mechanics, at least what I've seen so far. My opinion could change. There's a lot of things that could make the game bad, but I really have to experience it more. So far, my thoughts: very cool game. So I would definitely recommend checking it out. I mean, it's free, so why not? You spend a little bit of time. You do get to dive into the action pretty quick. The tutorial's super short, so recommend getting into it. Again, you have to get it on Epic Games. It's not available on Steam right now. Probably will be in the future, but lock in your account name, I guess, for now. And try it out. If you do want to watch some games played out in real time, you can check out the stream I did over on my VODs channel. There will definitely be more Shardbound videos coming in the future, so feel free to subscribe if you want to catch all of those on this channel. We're almost at like 1 million subs, I'm pretty sure, so anything would help out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.